A man sits alone at a wooden table, late at night, by the light of a single oil lamp. In front of him are 4 accounts of the same life, 4 scrolls, 4 different men writing about one man, and he has a problem. They don't match. One of them spends a whole page on the night Jesus was born. Another doesn't mention it at all. One says the women came to the tomb at dawn. Another says it was still dark. One records a saying you cannot find anywhere else. The man rubs his eyes. He has been told these 4 scrolls are the most important words ever written. So why? He keeps asking himself. Why are there 4 of them? Why didn't God just give us one? You have probably asked the same thing, even if you never said it out loud. You open your Bible, you find Matthew, then Mark, then Luke, then John. 4 books, lined up at the front of the New Testament, telling what looks like the same story 4 times. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a quiet voice wonders, wouldn't one have been simpler? Wouldn't one have been cleaner? Here's what most people miss. The 4 were not an accident. They were not 4 writers who failed to coordinate. The early church had every chance to merge them into one smooth book. And they refused. They guarded the 4. They fought to keep all 4, as if losing even one of them would mean losing part of his face. And that word, face, is not random. Because more than 1,000 years ago, when the first Christians tried to picture what these 4 books were, they reached for an image straight out of the throne room of God. 4 living creatures, a lion, an ox, a man, an eagle. 4 faces around one throne. They were certain those 4 faces were the 4 Gospels. They were just not certain which face belonged to which book. They argued about it for centuries. We will come back to those 4 faces. But not yet. Because first you need to understand something. This is not a story about 4 books. This is not a story about 4 authors who disagree. This is not a story about contradictions you have to explain away. This is a story about why a single face was simply too vast to fit inside one pair of human eyes, and why God, who could have given you 1 portrait, chose instead to give you 4. Start with the tax man. His name was Matthew, though his own people would have spat another name at him. Levi the collaborator. He sat at a wooden booth on the edge of town, and every coin that passed through his hands was a coin taken from his own neighbors and handed to the Roman Empire. He worked for the people who occupied his country. To a faithful Jew, there was no lower thing a man could become. Not a leper, not a thief, a tax collector, someone who got rich betraying his own. And one ordinary afternoon, a traveling teacher walked past his booth, looked at the most hated man in town, and said 2 words. "Follow me." Matthew got up. He left the money on the table. Now hold on to who this man was, because it tells you everything about the book he would write. Matthew had spent his whole life serving an empire. He knew what a king looked like. He knew the weight of Caesar's name and the fear you would have felt just hearing it. The way a single royal seal could move armies. And when he finally sat down to write his account of Jesus, that is exactly the lens he reached for. Matthew wrote the portrait of a king. Look at how he opens. Not with a stable, not with a star. He opens with a genealogy, a royal bloodline, traced from Abraham down through King David, all the way to a baby in Bethlehem. He is making a legal argument. He is saying, this man has a claim to the throne. And just 2 chapters in, foreign wise men arrive in Jerusalem asking a dangerous question. Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? And when those words reach the palace, King Herod does not laugh. Herod trembles, because deep down, Even the man wearing the crown knows there is only room for one king. There's a Greek word underneath all of this. The word gospel comes from euangelion, and in Matthew's world, that was not a religious term. It was a political one. An euangelion was the announcement that went out across the empire when a new emperor was crowned, or when Rome won a war. Good news from the throne. So when Matthew writes, "The Gospel of Jesus," he is doing something almost treasonous. He is announcing a new king, and it is not the one in Rome. That is the first face. The lion, royalty, authority, the king of the Jews. But it gets stranger, because the very next portrait could not be more different. Turn to Mark, and the throne room vanishes. The man behind this book was young. His name was John Mark, and he carried a failure most people would have hidden. Early in the mission, when the work got hard and dangerous, Mark quit. He walked away. He went home. The Apostle Paul was so disgusted that he later refused to travel with him at all. And there is an old tradition that the young man who shows up for a single strange moment in this very gospel, a boy who flees naked into the night when Jesus is arrested, leaving his only garment in a soldier's hand, is Mark himself, writing his own cowardice into the story, refusing to clean it up. So how does a man like that end up writing scripture? He listened. According to Papias, an early Christian writing within living memory of the apostles, Mark became the interpreter of Peter. He sat at the feet of a fisherman who had walked with Jesus, who had denied Jesus, who had wept and been restored. And Mark wrote down what Peter preached. This gospel is the memory of an eyewitness, filtered through a man who knew exactly what it felt like to fail and be given another chance. And you can feel Peter in it. This is the only gospel that tells you Jesus looked at people and felt anger, that he sighed, that he was tired enough to fall asleep in a boat in the middle of a storm. Those are not the details a committee invents. Those are the things a man remembers about someone he loved and watched up close. The small, unguarded moments that only an eyewitness would bother to keep. Mark did not soften any of it. He wrote down the rough edges, including his own. And it reads nothing like Matthew. There is no genealogy here. None. Because Mark is not painting a king on a throne. He is painting a servant in motion. And a servant does not need a family tree. A servant needs to work. You can feel the breathlessness when you read it out loud. There is a Greek word, euthys, that means immediately. And Mark uses it more than 40 times. Immediately, Jesus did this, and immediately he went there. And immediately the crowd pressed in. No long sermons, no pauses. Just a servant who heals and moves and serves and never seems to stop. It is the shortest gospel and the fastest. And that is the point. This is the face of the ox. Strength bent low, power that does not rest. The God who came not to be served, but to serve. Two men, a tax collector who had served an empire, and a young man who had once run away. One paints a king, one paints a servant. Same Jesus. Two completely different faces. Stay with me, because we are only halfway through the portraits, and the next two reach higher and deeper than anything yet. Before we go further, let me say one quick thing. If these two faces alone, the king and the servant, have already made you see Jesus a little differently than you did 10 minutes ago, then you are exactly the kind of person this channel is made for. Take 1 second and subscribe, because the two portraits still ahead are the reason this whole video exists. One of them was painted by a man who never even met Jesus. And the last one was written by an old man who outlived everyone he loved. And it changes everything. All right, back to the table, and the third scroll. The third man is the strangest of all, because he was not there. Matthew walked with Jesus. Mark had Peter. But the man who wrote the third gospel never saw Jesus heal a single person. He never heard him teach on a hillside. He was not a Jew, he was a Greek. And by trade, he was a doctor. His name was Luke, and Paul once called him simply the beloved physician. Think about what that means. The other Gospels were written by men of faith remembering what they had lived through. But Luke had to do something different. He had to investigate. And he tells you so, right at the start, in language that sounds almost like a journalist filing a report. He says he carefully looked into everything from the beginning, talking to the eyewitnesses, so that you might know the certainty of what you have been taught. So Luke went looking. He interviewed, he gathered, he cross-checked. And the man asking the questions was trained to notice the small things you and I would walk right past. Because a physician's whole life is built on paying attention to the body, to suffering, to the one detail that tells you what is really happening. And it shows. Watch what only Luke records. In the garden, on the last night, while the others wrote that Jesus prayed, only Luke, the doctor, tells you that his sweat became like great drops of blood falling to the ground. That is a medical observation. There is even a rare condition where extreme anguish ruptures the tiny vessels beneath the skin, and a person sweats blood. Only the physician thought that detail mattered enough to write down. It is also Luke who notices the small mercies a doctor would catch. The angel sent to strengthen him, the touch that heals a severed ear in the middle of the chaos of his arrest. Because Luke is not painting a king this time, and not a tireless servant. Luke is painting a man, a real, breathing, bleeding human being in the worst hours of his life. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Luke is the gospel of the people everyone else overlooked. It is Luke who lingers on the women. It is Luke who keeps turning the camera toward the poor, the sick, the outsiders, the ones polite society stepped around. And it is Luke, only Luke, who records the dying criminal on the cross beside Jesus, a convicted man with nothing left to offer, who simply asks to be remembered. And Jesus turns to him in his own agony and promises him paradise that very day. Here's the part nobody tells you. Of course, it was Luke who saved that story. Luke the Greek, Luke the outsider, Luke the one man among the four who was not born into the people of the promise. He knew the exact feeling, standing outside the circle, wondering if there is room for someone like you. And his whole gospel is one long answer. There is room. There is room for the woman. There is room for the leper. There is room for the thief. There is room for the foreigner. There is room for you. This is why the old church gave Luke the face of the man. Not a king above you, not even a servant beside you. A brother, flesh of your flesh, who calls himself again and again in this book, the Son of Man. That is the title he uses most, and it means exactly what it sounds like. One of us. And this is where it gets remarkable. Because notice what just happened to the size of the story. Matthew gave you a king for the Jews. Mark gave you a servant for those who would follow. But Luke kicks the doors off the building. Luke says this man does not belong to one nation, or one bloodline, or one kind of person. He belongs to everyone, the Greek and the Jew, the respectable and the ruined, the insider and the one who never got an invitation. The circle just got as wide as the human race. And just when you think the picture could not possibly get any bigger, the fourth man picks up his pen. And he does not start in Bethlehem. He does not start with a genealogy. He starts before the world was made. He was the last one left. By the time the fourth gospel was written, the others were gone. Matthew, Mark, the great voices of the early church. Most of them had been killed for the name they preached. Peter crucified, Paul beheaded, an entire generation of witnesses silenced one by one. And one old man remained. The disciple Jesus loved, the only one who had stood at the foot of the cross and not run. He had buried his friends. He had carried the memory for 60 years, longer than anyone else was left alive to carry it. And now, an old man with trembling hands, he sat down to write the last word anyone would ever add to the story. And watch where he begins. Matthew began with a king's bloodline. Mark began with a servant already at work. Luke began with the birth of a baby. But John does not begin in Bethlehem. He does not begin with Mary or a manger or a star. He reaches back past all of it, past Abraham, past Adam, past the first morning of creation. And he writes the most staggering opening sentence in all of human literature. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. There it is. The reason there is no genealogy in John. A family tree traces where you came from, and this is the one face among the four that has no beginning to trace. To draw his lineage, you would have to go back before the first morning, before there was a single day to count. The other three told you where Jesus came from. John tells you he never came from anywhere. He simply always was. This is the face of the eagle, the one that does not walk the ground with the king, or labor in the dust with the servant, or weep in the garden with the man. The eagle flies straight up, above time, above history, above creation itself, and looks down on all of it from the throne. This is the Son of God. And now, finally, we can come back to those four faces around the throne. Remember, at the very beginning, the four living creatures, the lion, the ox, the man, the eagle. The early Christians were certain those faces were the four Gospels. But here is the thing I promised you, the strange thing. They could never agree on which face went with which book. Irenaeus matched them one way, Augustine matched them another, Jerome a third. For centuries, the greatest minds in the church argued over it, and it took them far too long to see what the argument itself was telling them. The faces would not stay still, because no single face was ever enough. The king is also the servant. The man is also the Son of God. You cannot lock Jesus into one image, because the moment you do, you have lost 3/4 of who he is. The disagreement was never a problem to solve. It was the answer, hiding in plain sight. Let me show you what I mean with something you already understand. Imagine 4 people witness the same event on the same street corner. Later, the police take their statements separately, and the 4 accounts do not match perfectly. One noticed the color of the car. One remembered the sound. One was watching the faces. One saw the thing the other 3 missed entirely. Now, here is what every investigator knows. If those 4 statements matched perfectly, word for word, detail for detail, the police would not trust them more. They would trust them less. Because identical testimony is not the sign of truth. It is the sign of collusion. It means the witnesses got together and agreed on a story. The 4 Gospels do not match perfectly. And that is not the crack in the foundation. That is the foundation. They did not copy one another. They did not sit in a room and coordinate their accounts. They did not sand down the edges to make the seams disappear. They simply told you what they saw. A tax collector, a young man who once ran, a Greek physician, and an old fisherman's friend who outlived them all. 4 witnesses, 4 angles on one blinding light. And the very fact that their fingerprints are all different is the reason you can trust the face underneath. Because that face was always too large for one of them to capture alone. Too large, maybe, for all 4 together. John himself seemed to know it. He laid down his pen at the end of his gospel with a line that still echoes like a man standing at the edge of the ocean trying to describe the sea. He said that if everything Jesus did were written down, the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. One face, 4 portraits, and still not enough. So before you close this, let me leave you with 3 things to carry out the door. First, the 4 Gospels were never 4 competing stories. They are 4 portraits of one person, hung side by side in the same gallery. Matthew shows you the king, Mark shows you the servant, Luke shows you the man, John shows you the Son of God. You do not have to choose between them. You were never meant to. You are meant to walk slowly past all 4 and let them do together what none of them could do alone. Show you the whole face. Second, there is a reason God did not hand you a single, tidy account. He knew that one angle could never hold him. And if a king, a servant, a man, and the Son of God are all true of the same person at the same time, then maybe the lesson is for you too. Maybe you have been trying to fit Jesus into one frame, when the one who made you has always been larger than the box you keep reaching for. And third, this is the one I want you to actually feel. Of those 4 faces, there is one you need more than the others right now. Tonight, in whatever you are walking through. Some of you need the king, someone finally in charge of a life that feels out of control. Some of you need the servant, proof that God will get down on the floor and meet you in the mess. Some of you need the man, someone who has wept the way you are weeping and knows exactly how it feels. And some of you need the Son of God, someone bigger than the thing that is scaring you. Here is the wonder of it. 2,000 years ago, before you were born, before your name existed, 4 different men were each handed a different part of his face, and one of them was writing the exact portrait you would need to see today. So let me ask you, and I really do want your answer in the comments. Which of the 4 portraits do you need most right now? The king, the servant, the man, or the Son of God? Tell me below. I read them. 4 faces around one throne, a lion, an ox, a man, an eagle. The early church spent centuries trying to decide which face belonged to which book. But maybe they were asking the wrong question all along. Maybe the faces were never meant to be sorted and separated and filed away. Maybe they were only ever meant to be seen together, turned toward you, all 4 at once, the way they have been turned toward the world for 2,000 years. One face, too vast for one pair of eyes. So he gave you 4,